Welcome to this webinar, which is an introduction to emotion coaching for school staff, parents and carers. It may be that you've had training on emotion coaching previously, in which case this might hopefully be a useful refresher. My name is Dr. Alison DeMario and I'm an educational and child psychologist working for the Xavier Catholic Education Trust. The aims of this session are to understand the meaning and purpose of emotion coaching, to explore the theories underpinning emotion coaching, to develop scripts for using emotion coaching in the classroom or at home, and to reflect on how you could adapt your practice or your parenting to incorporate some of the ideas discussed today. I'd like you to start by thinking about the last time that you felt really angry. What had happened and who were you angry with? You may like to pause the video to give yourself time to reflect. The picture on this slide illustrates something called the Anger Iceberg, and it represents the idea that often when we're angry, there are actually other emotions underneath the surface that we're just less skilled at being able to identify and express. It's really easy to feel angry and to show anger, as it's an active emotion that gives us an outlet for our emotions. However, it's more difficult to reflect on the other, more vulnerable emotions beneath the surface. For example, a parent who is angry at their child for having a meltdown in the middle of the supermarket may actually be feeling embarrassed, mortified, anxious, overwhelmed, ashamed, hurt, pressured, alone, frustrated. Think about the example that you thought about in the previous slide for when you were really angry. What were the other emotions underneath the surface in that situation? You may like to pause at this point to reflect on this. The purpose of this exercise is to demonstrate that our behaviour is driven by our emotions, and even as adults, we aren't always skilled at accurately identifying and managing those emotions. Children and young people are much less experienced than us at doing this, and they don't have the emotional vocabulary that we do. So we really need to take the time to try to understand the emotions beneath their behaviour and use that as a starting point for behaviour change. We're now going to focus upon your class if you are a member of school staff, or your child or children if you're a parent or carer. Take a moment to write yourself a list of the types of behaviours that occur that may lead to a child getting into trouble. Pause the video now while you do this. If you only take one message away from this training, let it be this: all behaviour is communication. At the heart of emotion coaching is the idea that rather than just matching sanctions and consequences to behaviours that we don't like, we need to look at what the child is communicating to us through their behaviour. What is the emotion under the surface, and what are they trying to tell us? What function does that behaviour serve for them? This is an emotion wheel. Next to the list of behaviours that you wrote down, what behaviours do you think that there might be underneath the surface for that child? If we take the example of the child having a meltdown in the supermarket, the emotions underneath the surface might be sadness because they wanted a toy and weren't allowed one, frustration because they wanted to choose a big chocolate cake for dinner and weren't allowed to. They might be tired, bored, hungry, overstimulated and overwhelmed by all the bright lights and the noise and the people, rejected because they wanted your attention and you're busy. You may like to pause the video for a moment now to consider the emotions that may fit with your list of behaviours. And this is the premise of emotion coaching. Gottman, 1997, said much of today's popular advice ignores the world of emotions. Instead, it relies on child-rearing theories that address the children's behaviour but disregard the feelings that underlie that behaviour. An example of this in a school might be the child who leaves a lesson without permission being given a detention as a sanction for that behaviour. And this does nothing to address the underlying reason and emotion behind the reason that the child felt they needed to leave the room. At home, it might be a child having their iPad taken away for not having done their homework. And again, this does nothing to address the underlying reason and emotion beneath the surface for why the child is avoiding their work. Gottman said, negative feelings dissipate when children can talk about their emotions, label them, and feel understood. The problem with this is that children often don't have the emotional literacy skills needed to be able to identify their emotions and label them. And traditional behaviour management strategies leave very little opportunity for an open, loving conversation about how they are feeling. He also said, children need to understand that their feelings are not the problem, but their behaviour might be. So anger is fine. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel sadness. It's okay to feel worry. None of those are bad things, and none of those are a problem. So what is emotion coaching? Emotion coaching involves recognizing, understanding, labeling, and validating emotions as they happen. Emotion coaching encourages all adults in schools to look for indicators of low-level negative emotions, which are often reflected through pupils' behaviour or body language, and to empathise with, label, and validate those emotions as they occur. This approach is contrasted with ignoring or minimising the behaviour and the emotions and feelings, or solely applying consequences to the behaviour. Emotion coaching gives children strategies to deal with the ups and downs in their emotions. It accepts negative emotions as normal. It uses moments of negative behaviour as an opportunity for connection and teaching. And it builds trusting and respectful relationships with children that can so easily be damaged through traditional behaviour management strategies. So emotion coaching is an alternative to what we call the behavioural approach, which is things like timeouts, rewards and sanctions, the naughty step, because all of those things leave no room to educate the person about their emotions and to connect with the person. And it tends to induce shame, and it provides no learning about what could have been done differently. It can be used as a whole school approach to support emotional health and well-being. It's universal and inclusive. It doesn't involve certain children being given the strategies and taken off for individual sessions. This is something for everybody, and that all parents and carers can use with their children at home. And for teachers, there are no new curriculum or resources or special programme. Emotion coaching just involves 5 really simple steps. It improves the quality of teacher-pupil relationships, and it also encourages the adult to be quite mindful in their approach, to take a step back from the emotions that they might feel, to notice the emotions that it's bringing out in them, and to just approach the situation in a non-judgmental way. This diagram illustrates the key difference between approaches like sanctions and rewards in comparison to emotion coaching. So rewards and sanctions rely on the adult externally regulating their behaviour, whereas emotion coaching helps the child to self-regulate their own behaviour. Emotion coaching is underpinned by our understanding of how the brain develops. The first part of our brain to develop is called the brain stem, and that's the part in yellow, which controls our reflexes and survival, so things like breathing, blinking, temperature regulation. The second part of our brain to develop is the limbic brain, also known as the emotional brain. That's the part in green. And that's also fully developed at birth. However, the cortical brain is where our learning, reasoning, logic and thinking comes in. And that's the blue part. That's not fully developed until our mid-20s. So throughout childhood, children are developing pathways between these parts of the brain to allow them to learn to regulate their emotions better. And we can see that in action when you think about a 2-year-old who might have a full-blown emotional reaction to something very small, like being given the wrong colour cup, for example. Whereas hopefully that might be a less common occurrence in a 7-year-old, for example. And this means that children are much more likely to respond in an emotional way, and they are less able to regulate and reason. For all of us, when we experience an emotional response and we are anxious, for example, or overcome with anger, activation in that top part of the brain reduces, and we're much less able to apply logic, learning, and think reasonably. When we're in that state, we cannot be reasoned with until we've started to calm down, and children are no different. When a child's experiencing a big emotion, we first need to help them to calm down, and the best place to start is using activities that calm the lower regions of the brain. So starting with sensory activities like jumping, stretching, calming music, rhythmic breathing exercises, firm hugs, they can all be very, very effective. And the next step would be then engaging with that limbic part of the brain. So labeling the emotions and empathizing, and that's where emotion coaching comes in. Some people use this hand model as a way of explaining the brain to children of all ages. So the image on the right hand side of the screen, with the hand in a fist, that represents the three parts of the brain: the brain stem as the wrist, and then the limbic region, the emotional brain, as kind of the palm of the hand, and then the fingers over the top represent the cortical area, or the thinking brain. And usually those parts are all together and they work together to create sort of balanced responses. However, Dr. Dan Siegel coined the phrase flipping their lid, which is the diagram on the left-hand side, where that cortical brain just flips up and then it stops working in tandem with the rest of the brain. And that's what happens when we feel those big emotions like anxiety and anger. There's some really lovely videos on YouTube of Dan Siegel explaining this more fully, and I'd really recommend giving them a watch. Some people may listen to this and at first think that it's quite touchy-feely and maybe it doesn't do enough to set firm boundaries. And I'm hoping that by the end of this session, I might have been able to change your mind, because that's a really key part of emotion coaching. And this diagram shows how emotion coaching fits with other behaviour management styles. So along the top, we've got two approaches that are both high in empathy in comparison to two approaches at the bottom which are low in empathy. And then on the left hand side, we've got two approaches that are high in guidance and boundary setting. And then on the right hand side, we've got two approaches that are low in guidance and boundary setting. So just to explain what these are. So we've talked a lot about emotion coaching. That's the focus of the session today. So in a nutshell, it values all emotions, it empathizes, it helps to understand the feelings while also guiding the behaviour. If we look at laissez-faire now, which is the other one that also accepts all emotions, the problem with that one is that it fails to then place guidance around the behaviour. So it accepts the emotion but then doesn't set any boundaries, and that is not what emotion coaching is. If we look at those ones at the bottom, which are low in empathy, you've got emotion disapproving, which is low in empathy but high in guidance. So the boundaries are there, but the empathy is not. So emotion disapproving is disapproving or critical of emotions being expressed, particularly those uncomfortable emotions like children being angry or upset or anxious. And then on the right hand side at the bottom, we've got emotion dismissing. So that's where they might ignore uncomfortable emotions and just want to relieve the uncomfortable emotions. So it might be, oh, don't cry, here, take the sweets, have the sweets, anything to stop you from crying. I'm going to show you now two comic strips that illustrate two different types of parenting styles. So this first one, you might like to think about which one is being illustrated here. So this little girl has just found that her turtle has died. So she comes in and says, my turtle is dead. He was alive this morning. And the dad says, now, don't get so upset, honey. She carries on crying and he says, don't cry, it's only a turtle. She carries on crying even more because he's not really understanding how she's feeling or empathizing with her in any way. Stop that, I'll buy you another turtle. And then she cries even more, I don't want another one. Well, now you're just being unreasonable. So have a think for a moment about what type of parenting or what approach to behaviour management that might be. The answer is dismissive. So that was the dismissive style. And it didn't end well. And I just want to show you an alternative that would be using emotion coaching. So this is an example using emotion coaching. Again, it's the same situation. My turtle is dead. He was alive this morning. Oh no, what a shock. So he's labelling her emotions there. He was my friend. To lose a friend can hurt. Again, he's labelling her emotions. She's shocked. She's hurt. I taught him to do tricks. You two had fun together. He's validating and empathising with her. Of course she's upset. I fed him every day. You really cared about that turtle. Just for a moment now, I want to focus on why emotion coaching is so important in schools. So school experience has a powerful influence on a child's life and their sense of well-being. Pupils' level of satisfaction with their relationships with their teachers is the most important contributory factor to their overall happiness in school. And I think that the last year has really shown us the importance and value of those relationships. And now that we've talked about the theoretical underpinnings and what emotion coaching is, we're now going to talk about how to do it. So there are 5 steps to emotion coaching. The first one is to be aware of your child's emotions. So to be quite mindful in that situation, to notice your emotions, to notice their emotions and what's beneath the surface. Step 2 is to recognise that emotion as an opportunity for connection or teaching. So to just pause for a second before you react and give a sanction or a punishment. Just recognise that emotion and take a second to connect with them and teach them how to respond. Number 3 is to help your child to verbally label the emotion. At first, you'll probably have to do that for them while they develop the emotional vocabulary, but as you do it, you're coaching them. So eventually they'll be able to label those emotions for themselves. Step 4 is to communicate empathy and understanding and to validate how they're feeling, as shown in that example with the turtle. And then step 5, set limits and problem solve if necessary. It may not also always be necessary. For example, with the turtle example, no limits needed to be set there. She hadn't done anything wrong. But there may be situations where the child's emotion wasn't wrong, but the way that they've shown it through their behaviour was, and therefore limits need to be set. And that's what separates this from the laissez-faire approach. So in practice, hopefully we'll always be kind of looking for those emotions and looking for that and seeing those emotions as an opportunity to connect. So in practice, there are just 3 steps to remember. Number 1, empathize, validate, and label. Step 2, set limits. And step 3, problem solve. And we're going to go through how you can do that and what kind of phrases you can use to do that. So starting with empathize, validate, and label. It's key to recognise that all emotions are natural and normal. Affirm and empathise to calm down that emotional response, and then provide a narrative to support the formation of those cognitive links. So that goes back to that brain diagram that we said before. You're working with that limbic part of the brain to help them to develop the links between that more rational part of the brain so that eventually they can start to self-regulate. Phrases that you might use to be able to empathise, validate or label might be things like, I see you're feeling a certain way, or I notice, I hear, are you feeling, is there anything else that you're feeling? I imagine that feels, tell me about that. Are you saying that it sounds to me like you feel angry because something felt unfair? Is that right? How does that make you feel? All of those things provide an opportunity for the development of that relationship, for the trusting relationship, for them to be able to explain how they feel, for you to be able to reflect that back to them, empathise and label those emotions. And these are some more complete examples. I can see that you feel frustrated when that happens. I feel that way too when I think something's been unfair. It's normal to feel angry sometimes. And you may then go on to set the limits, because it may be that they felt angry, which is fine, but then they've lashed out, and that's not fine. But we'll get onto that later. Second example, I've noticed you looking around at other children's work on their projects. I think you might be feeling nervous about whether your work will be okay, am I right? And that might be a really nice example to use, for example, in a classroom situation where a child is perhaps copying off another child, and that might be seen as a punishable offence in some situations. But actually, this is much more powerful. Why are they doing that? What is the feeling underneath the surface? Use that as an opportunity to connect. Again, I'd like you to take a moment to pause the video and think about some of these points that hopefully really illustrate the importance and power of empathy. When you are feeling upset about something, just consider for a moment, who do you talk to? What do you want from that person? And why are they the person that you choose to talk to? And what do people sometimes do that's unhelpful in those situations?
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy: perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So that activity that I've just asked you to do, I'm sure for that third question, often when we think about what people do that's unhelpful, it's when people try to give you a solution. It can make you feel disempowered. It minimises the problem that you had and makes you feel that they haven't really listened to you or understood how rubbish you're feeling. And as adults, we do that to children all of the time. What we need to do is empathise, connect, and create an emotional bond first. And Gottman put it really well. He said, proposing solutions before empathising is like trying to build a frame of a house before you lay a firm foundation. So on to limit setting, if needed. As I said before, it may not always be needed, but if there was a behaviour that actually wasn't an appropriate behaviour, it's important that we have clear boundaries, but help the child keep their self-dignity and help to keep that relationship strong. So you might say things like, it's okay to feel angry, but it's never okay to hit somebody. These are the rules that we have to follow, and doing that is not okay. Or, even when we're annoyed, we can't behave like that because it's not safe. And the very final step is problem solving. And it's really important that this is done when the child is in a calm, relaxed, and rational state. Explore the feelings that gave rise to the behaviour or incident or event, and then help to scaffold alternative ideas and actions that could lead to a more appropriate and productive outcome. So have a discussion, have a debrief about what happened, how they were feeling at that time, how they feel now about their behaviour and what they did, and why maybe it wasn't the best course of action, and what they could do differently next time. And empower the child to believe that they can overcome the behaviour and manage their feelings. Some good phrases for this could be things like, tell me what happened to make you feel this way. What can you do to solve this problem? What might you do differently next time that you feel this way? Is there anyone that could help you with this? Let's take a look at some different choices and then let them pick which one they think is best. This isn't a safe place to be angry. Let's go somewhere safe and then we can talk. You can choose to sit by Thomas or next to your key worker in front of me. Which would you like to choose? If you're doing this as part of staff training, you might like to do this activity either on your own or in small groups, or you may like to do this at home if you're watching at home. And try to create an emotion coaching script for one of these scenarios, starting with the empathizing and validating, moving through the limit setting, and then on to the problem solving. So one of them is Lisa, age 5, who's finding it difficult to come into the classroom each morning and separate from her mum. Again, we wouldn't need to do any limit setting with that one. She's not doing anything wrong. We just need to help her by empathising and validating how she's feeling. Hamza, age 10, who's struggling to control his anger when playing on the field with the other children. And Enzo, age 7, often refusing to do the work set and has a tendency to wander aimlessly around the classroom. So now we've talked about what emotion coaching is, we've discussed the theoretical underpinnings, and we talked about how you would actually do emotion coaching. But I want to finish by just going through some of the reasons why we should do emotion coaching. And this is some of the research evidence, which is really compelling. So children who are emotion coached are better able to calm and regulate functions within their brain and body and develop more effective stress response systems. That's that self-regulation that we've been talking about. They achieve more academically in school because we know that children who are stressed or anxious or angry and struggling to regulate their emotions are less able to learn. They're more popular with their peers, they have fewer behavioural problems, experience fewer infectious illnesses, which suggests that they're less stressed perhaps. They're more emotionally stable and resilient, and they're buffered from some of the negative effects of family breakup. And to continue with the research evidence, we know that emotion coaching is good for all children, but there's specific evidence about children of different groups or with different conditions that it's also really useful for. So it positively supports children with depression, with internalising difficulties, conduct behavioural difficulties, complex trauma, oppositional defiant disorder, children deemed at risk, and also children on the autistic spectrum. And I think it's also really important to look at how emotion coaching impacts on the adults who do it, whether that be parents or whether that's adults in schools. And what the research shows is that emotion coaching improves adult self-regulation as well. We're less reactive, and adults tend to find then the difficult situations less stressful and exhausting because they're taking a step back from it and just noticing what might be going on underneath the surface rather than reacting to the behaviour. One primary school teacher said, "I show more empathy with how the child must be feeling, and it helps you to slow down and consider why the child is angry or upset. Because I use this, I think the relationships I have with the children is much more relaxed." So to finish off this session today, I'd just like you to take a moment to reflect on some of these questions. So what aspects of the emotion coaching do you think you already apply in your practice or in your parenting? Can you see how emotion coaching might be applied in your practice, or any incidents that may have occurred when actually emotion coaching could have been used and might have been really useful in diffusing the situation? Can you see any possible challenges with it? And if so, how could these be overcome? I hope that you found this session useful today, and thank you very much for listening.